the 12 bells of eternity. The forest was alive with secrets. It whispered through the gnarled trees and breathed through the cold fog that curled around their roots. At its heart, veiled by brambles as black as midnight, stood the Tower of Eternity. Its spire pierced the heavens, its silhouette a jagged wound against the pale silver of the winter moon. 12 bells hung within its skeletal walls, silent and waiting, like watchful sentinels of an ancient decree. Prince Elion once strode through life as if the world were his kingdom to shape and conquer. His reign was one of beauty and power, celebrated in ballads sung by bards across the land. Yet beneath his golden crown and silk-draped court lay a heart as hard as the iron chains that now bound him. The curse had come on a night much like this, cold and still, when the stars gleamed like shards of glass in a black sea. The beggar woman had appeared at the castle gates, hunched and shivering, her hands outstretched for warmth and mercy. But Elion had turned her away with a sneer. "You taint my halls with your filth," he'd spat, his voice echoing against the marble columns of his throne room. "Take your misery elsewhere." He had laughed as the guards dragged her from his sight. But laughter turned to silence when the beggar rose to her full height, her rags dissolving into a robe of shadows. Her voice, now resonant with ancient power, filled the chamber. "Elion of Dravamir," she proclaimed, "your beauty is your curse, your pride, your downfall. You shall walk this earth neither living nor dead until you have learned the weight of your sins." With a wave of her hand, his body faded like smoke. The last thing he saw before darkness swallowed him was the horrified faces of his courtiers. The last thing he heard was the peal of a bell, low and mournful, like a dirge. For centuries, he had lingered in the liminal space between life and death, his soul tethered to the Tower of Eternity. He could not leave its shadow, nor could he grasp the solid world around him. Time slipped through his fingers like sand, years folding into decades, decades into centuries. The 12 bells hung above him, their presence a constant reminder of his sentence. Yet they remained silent, their power unreachable. Until tonight. A faint tremor stirred the tower, a resonance that vibrated through the stones and echoed in Elion's very essence. The stars above aligned in a pattern he had not seen in his long, unending imprisonment. The air crackled with energy, and a voice, as soft as a breath, yet as firm as a decree, whispered from the void. "The night has come, Prince of Shadows. The bells await." Elion stood at the tower's threshold, his form translucent but steady. He knew what the voice meant. He had read the runes carved into the walls, their meaning etched into his mind over the endless years. He must ring each of the 12 bells before the first light of dawn, each toll redeeming a sin, each chime summoning a trial. Only then could he hope to break the curse and reclaim his mortal form. But the forest held its own secrets, and the guardians of the bells would not yield easily. The Oracle of Thorns had ensured his path would be fraught with peril, for redemption could not be bought without sacrifice. As the midnight hour approached, the forest grew unnaturally silent. The wind stilled, the animals hushed, and the very air seemed to hold its breath. Elion stepped forward, his translucent hand brushing the cold iron of the tower door. The metal groaned as it swung open, revealing the darkness within. The first bell hung in the chamber above, its surface dull with age, but humming faintly with power. A shadow stirred in the corner of the room, coiling and slithering, its eyes like embers in the gloom. The Serpent of Remorse awaited him, its presence as suffocating as the weight of his guilt. Elion took a deep breath, his form shimmering with determination. This was his chance, his only chance, to undo the curse that had bound him for so long. But with each step he took towards the bell, he could feel the forest watching, waiting, as if the entire world held its breath. The toll of the first bell would not come easily, but it would come. For the first time in centuries, Elion allowed himself a spark of hope, and so he ascended, the echoes of eternity whispering his name. The spiral staircase wound upward into darkness, its steps carved from stone that seemed to drink the faint light spilling from the chamber below. Each footfall echoed like a heartbeat, slow and steady, reverberating against the tower's ancient walls. Elion's form flickered, a wavering ghost in the void as he climbed toward the first of 12 trials. At the summit of the stairs, a circular chamber awaited, vast and shadowed. The bell of remorse loomed at its center, suspended by chains that disappeared into the blackness above. Its surface was tarnished, the once gleaming metal dulled by centuries of silence. Coiled beneath it was the Serpent of Shadow, its long body rippling like liquid smoke, its ember eyes watching with unblinking intensity. The serpent's voice slithered into the air, sharp and venomous. "Do you think yourself ready, Prince of Shadows? This bell will not toll for the unworthy. Are you prepared to confront the weight of your sins?" Elion's jaw tightened, his spectral hand brushing against the cold steel of his sword's hilt, though he knew the blade was useless here. "I am prepared." The serpent hissed a laugh, low and chilling. "We shall see." It rose, a coil of darkness that towered over him, and with a flick of its tail, the room shifted. The chamber dissolved, replaced by a vision of Elion's past. A banquet hall filled with laughter and music, its tables laden with golden platters of food. At the head of the table sat Elion himself, radiant in his youth, his face a mask of smug contentment. The scene twisted. The joyous chatter fell silent, replaced by muffled sobs. Figures emerged from the shadows. peasants, their faces hollow with hunger, their hands outstretched toward the feast. One by one they crumbled to ash beneath the weight of his indifference. "Do you remember them, Prince?" the serpent whispered, its voice coiling around his heart. "The lives you deemed unworthy of your mercy. They cry out to you still." Elion staggered, the weight of the vision pressing against his very soul. His pride had blinded him, his power wielded as a weapon instead of a shield. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to look into the hollow eyes of those he had wronged. "I see them," he said, his voice shaking but resolute. "I cannot undo the past, but I will not turn away from it." The serpent lunged, its jaws wide, but Elion did not flinch. Instead, he reached for the bell's rope, his hand passing through the spectral fabric of his form to grasp its rough fibers. With a mighty pull, he rang the bell, its toll reverberating through the chamber. The serpent shrieked as the sound tore through it, scattering its shadowy form into the air. The vision faded, the banquet hall dissolving into darkness. When the chamber stilled, the bell hung gleaming, its tarnish burned away by the purity of its sound. The second chamber awaited above, its threshold marked by a golden glow. The bell of sacrifice stood within, surrounded by a ring of golden fire. Its guardian, a phoenix wreathed in flames, regarded Elion with piercing eyes that burned with both judgment and sorrow. "This bell demands more than repentance," the phoenix intoned. "It demands the surrender of what you hold dear." Elion hesitated. "What must I give?" The phoenix spread its wings, and before him appeared fragments of his past. A memory of his father teaching him to wield a sword, the scent of his mother's perfume on a summer breeze, the laughter of a friend long lost. Each memory shimmered like a delicate flame. "Your pride is built on these moments," the phoenix said. "Surrender one, or the bell shall not toll." Elion's chest tightened. These memories were all he had left, fragile threads connecting him to a life he had long since lost. But the tolling of the bell meant more than his comfort. It meant redemption. With trembling hands, he touched the memory of his father, watching as it dissolved into light. The bell's toll was mournful, echoing with the loss he had chosen. The phoenix bowed its head, its flames dimming as the second trial ended. The bell of courage tested him next, its chamber filled with the chilling sound of clashing steel. From the shadows emerged a spectre of himself, clad in armor and wielding a blade identical to the one at his side. This was no mere guardian. It was the embodiment of the warrior he had been, ruthless and unyielding. "Face yourself," the spectre growled, its voice cold as winter frost. Elion cast his sword aside, stepping forward unarmed. "I will not fight you," he declared. "I have fought the world and won, but it brought me only emptiness." The spectre lunged, its blade flashing, but Elion stood firm. The weapon passed through him, the image shattering like glass. The bell tolled in recognition of his courage, its sound pure and resolute. The bell of trust awaited last, hidden within a labyrinth of illusions. Voices whispered from every direction, leading him astray at every turn. Yet he pressed on, trusting the faint flicker of light that guided him. When he reached the bell, he rang it with a certainty born of faith in the unseen. As his toll faded, the labyrinth dissolved, and the forest trembled. 4 bells had rung, their power rippling through the tower. Elion climbed higher, his resolve growing stronger with each step. The trials of the dawn had ended, but the path ahead would demand even more. The air grew colder as Elion ascended, each step drawing him closer to the heart of the tower's power. The higher he climbed, the thicker the shadows became, as though the darkness itself sought to smother him. His spectral form glowed faintly, the tolls of the first 4 bells resonating deep within him. A fragile but growing harmony. At the top of the spiral, a pair of massive wooden doors loomed, etched with intricate carvings that seemed to shift and writhe when he wasn't looking directly at them. He pushed them open and entered the next chamber. The bell of compassion hung in its center, its bronze surface gleaming faintly, as though touched by the first light of dawn. Surrounding it was a forest of crystal trees, their branches dripping with prisms that reflected shimmering rainbows onto the chamber walls. Yet, in the midst of this ethereal beauty, a small cage hung suspended from a branch, its bars cold and cruel. Inside was a child, her face pale and eyes hollow. Standing guard over both bell and cage was a griffin, its wings of silver and gold folded neatly against its powerful body. Its gaze was piercing, its eyes filled with ancient wisdom and challenge. "The bell calls for compassion," the griffin said, its voice a low rumble like distant thunder. "But compassion requires action. Will you choose to save her or toll the bell? The choice is yours, Prince." Elion hesitated, his hands curling into fists. The griffin's question struck deep, for he knew the child was an illusion, a construct of magic meant to test his resolve. Yet her trembling form, her pleading eyes, were heartbreakingly real in this moment. If he chose the bell, the trial would end, and the tower's power would draw closer to surrender. But if he saved her, the bell would remain silent, and dawn crept ever closer. He stepped forward, his voice steady. "There is no choice to make. I will save her." The griffin's head tilted as if in curiosity, its eyes gleaming as Elion reached the cage. With effort, he pried the bars apart, freeing the child. She collapsed into his arms, her weight surprisingly heavy for an illusion. The griffin's wings flared, and the chamber dissolved into light, the girl vanishing as though she had never been. When Elion looked again, the bell rang of its own accord, its sound pure and resonant. The griffin bowed deeply before dissolving into mist. the next chamber was suffocating in its stillness. The bell of truth hung above a pool of dark, rippling water, its silver surface polished to a mirror shine. Beneath its glow stood a figure shrouded in shadow, a siren, her ethereal beauty both alluring and unnerving. Her song filled the air, haunting and sweet, pulling Elion into a dreamlike haze. "Step forward," she sang, her voice wrapping around him like silk. "See what lies beneath the surface." Elion approached the pool, gazing into its depths. At first, he saw only his reflection, hollowed eyes, a faint shimmer of his former beauty. But as he stared, the water rippled, showing glimpses of his darkest lies. A battlefield strewn with bodies. His sword raised high as he declared the battle won. The face of a trusted friend betrayed for ambition. The shattered heart of a woman who had loved him once, abandoned for power. Each image cut deeper than the last. The lies he had told himself, the justifications, the denials, were laid bare. He dropped to his knees, unable to look away. The siren's voice grew softer. "The bell will toll only for one who can face their truth without turning away. Do you have the strength, Prince?" Tears streaked Elion's spectral face as he forced himself to rise. "I do not turn away," he said, his voice hoarse but resolute. "I see my lies. I see my truths." With those words, the bell tolled, its sound rippling through the water, shattering the images. The siren smiled faintly before sinking into the pool, leaving Elion alone once more. The chamber of the Bell of Balance was a study in opposites. The room was divided by a jagged line, one side burning with fire, the other coated in frost. At its center stood the bell, suspended between twin dragons, one wreathed in flame, the other cloaked in ice. The dragons hissed in unison. Balance is the key. You must harmonize what cannot be tamed. Elion stepped forward, the heat searing his skin on one side, the cold biting into him on the other. The dragons circled him, their opposing forces threatening to tear him apart. He closed his eyes, focusing not on their differences, but on their shared essence, the rhythm of their movements, the harmony in their duality. Reaching deep within himself, he raised his hands, drawing the fire and ice together. The elements resisted at first, clashing violently, but he held firm, finding equilibrium in their chaos. The dragons roared in unison, their forms merging into one, and the bell tolled, its sound resonating with perfect balance. Finally, the bell of forgiveness awaited, its chamber bathed in soft, pale light. Standing before it was a pale unicorn, its eyes filled with sorrow and wisdom. "To toll this bell, you must forgive," it said simply. "The one who cursed you." Elion's breath caught. The oracle's face flashed in his mind, her cold gaze, her words of condemnation. Anger surged within him, but so too did understanding. He had deserved her curse. He had been cruel, unrepentant. To blame her was to deny his own faults. He knelt before the bell, his head bowed. "I forgive her," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Not for her sake, but for mine." The bell tolled softly, its sound like the first sigh of dawn. As its echo faded, Elion rose, his steps heavier, but his spirit lighter. He climbed higher, leaving the midnight guardians behind, knowing the final bell awaited. The final staircase spiraled into eternity, its steps carved from translucent stone that shimmered like frozen moonlight. Each step resonated with the echoes of the bells Elion had already tolled, their notes intertwining into a haunting melody that grew louder the higher he climbed. The air was heavy, suffused with a palpable energy that made his spectral form flicker with every step. When he reached the summit, the chamber revealed itself, a vast expanse suspended in a void of endless stars. The floor beneath him glowed faintly, a translucent surface that seemed to float in the cosmos. At the center of the chamber hung the bell of eternity, its massive frame forged from a metal that glimmered with shifting colors, as if it contained the essence of time itself. It did not sway or hum like the others. Instead, it hung in perfect stillness, exuding an overwhelming presence. Standing before the bell was the Oracle of Thorns. Her figure was draped in a cloak of shifting shadows, her face hidden behind a mask of thorny vines that twisted and pulsed with a life of their own. Her voice, when it came, was both a whisper and a roar, filling the infinite space around them. "You have come far, Prince of Shadows, farther than I expected. But this final toll will demand more than strength, courage, or sacrifice. It will demand the surrender of the last piece of yourself." Elion stood tall, though his form flickered under the weight of her words. "What must I surrender?" The oracle extended a hand, and the space around them transformed. The stars dimmed, and visions of Elion's past life materialized. His kingdom, his throne, the wealth and power that had once defined him. He saw himself surrounded by courtiers, their laughter hollow, yet indulgent, their smiles masking envy and fear. He saw the towering marble halls of his palace, gleaming with opulence but devoid of warmth. "You have clung to the belief that you were owed your former life," the oracle said. "That your beauty, your power, your crown were your birthright. This bell will toll only if you relinquish that belief, if you accept the truth of what you were, and the man you must become." Elion's chest tightened. The visions shifted, showing not just his triumphs, but the scars they had left on others. Villages burned in his name, families torn apart, the faces of those he had discarded without a second thought. His hands trembled as he reached out toward the visions, as if to grasp them, to hold on to what he had once been. I was a king," he said, his voice cracking. "I was meant to rule, to lead." The oracle tilted her head. "And what did you lead your people toward? Fear? Suffering? You were a king, but you were not a man. Now, you must choose. Will you cling to the shadow of your throne, or will you step into the light of redemption? Elion sank to his knees, the weight of her words crushing him. For centuries, he had dreamed of returning to his kingdom, to his power, believing that the curse had robbed him of his rightful place. But now, faced with the truth, he saw his kingdom for what it had been, a monument to his vanity, a hollow reflection of the man he had been. He bowed his head, his voice barely above a whisper. I release it. The crown, the power, the pride. I see now that they were chains and not blessings. I surrender it all. The oracle stepped aside, revealing the bell's rope. Elion rose slowly, his form glowing faintly as he approached. His hand, trembling but resolute, grasped the rope and pulled. The bell of eternity tolled, its sound unlike anything Elion had heard before. It was not a single note, but a symphony, deep, resonant, and infinite, as though the bell contained the echoes of every moment in time. The sound filled the chamber, washing over him in waves, dissolving the shadows and leaving only light. The oracle's mask of thorns crumbled away, revealing a face that was neither young nor old, neither human nor divine. She smiled faintly, her voice softer now. You have done what few could. The curse is broken. Go, Prince Elion. Live as the man you were meant to be. The chamber dissolved into light, and Elion felt his spectral form solidify, his heartbeat returning like the first drumbeat of spring. He collapsed onto a field of grass, the dawn breaking over the horizon. The forest around him bloomed with new life, its darkness lifting as the tolls of the bells faded into silence. Elion sat beneath the rising sun, his body frail but human, his spirit scarred but whole. The echoes of the bells lingered in his mind, a reminder of the trials he had faced and the man he had become. He looked towards the horizon, the light of a new day calling him forward. The tower of eternity was gone, but its lesson remained. Redemption was not found in reclaiming the past, but in stepping into the future. And for the first time in centuries, Elion rose, not as a prince, but as a man ready to begin again. The forest around Elion stirred with new life, its silence replaced by the whispers of leaves and the soft murmur of streams that seemed to have been born from the earth itself. The tower of eternity, with its ancient walls and 12 bells, had vanished, leaving no trace of its existence. Yet its presence lingered, not in stone or shadow, but in the air and in Elion's heart. The curse was broken, but its echoes would remain. Elion sat at the edge of a quiet glade, the first rays of dawn warming his skin. He flexed his hands, now solid and warm, no longer the translucent echoes of a ghost, yet the weight of his journey hung upon him like a shroud. His body was no longer the strong, youthful form he once commanded. He was older, his frame leaner, his movements slower. The world had not returned him to the prince he had been, but to the man he was now. As he stared into the distance, a faint sound reached his ears. It was soft, almost imperceptible, a lingering hum, like the toll of a bell heard from across a great distance. He closed his eyes and let the sound wash over him, its melody filling the spaces where regret and sorrow once resided. It was not the mournful toll of loss, but the quiet, persistent echo of redemption. For a long time, he sat in the stillness, his thoughts unspooling like threads. The faces of those he had wronged returned to him, not as accusations, but as reminders. He had been given a second chance, not to erase his past, but to confront it, to heal, not only himself, but the wounds he had left on the world. The sound of footsteps broke his reverie. Elion turned to see a figure stepping into the glade. It was a young woman, her cloak patched and travel-worn, her eyes wide with curiosity. She froze when she saw him, her gaze darting between his weathered face and the ruined earth where the Tower of Eternity had stood. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice cautious but not unkind. Elion hesitated, the question echoing in his mind. Who was he now? Not the Prince of Dravamir, nor the cursed wraith of the tower. He had no title, no crown, no kingdom. Yet for the first time he felt no need for them. "I am a man," he said simply, his voice steady. "A man searching for a way to make amends." The woman studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded, as though satisfied. "You're not the first to come here," she said, gesturing toward the glade. "This place is strange. People say it's sacred, that it heals what's broken." Elion looked around, the forest's newfound vibrancy seeming to pulse with quiet power. Perhaps it was sacred in a way, not because of the tower that had once stood here, but because of the trials it had birthed, the lessons it had etched into the fabric of this place. "And you?" he asked. "Why have you come?" The woman hesitated before answering. "I'm looking for answers. For a way forward?" Elion nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "Then perhaps we can help each other." Together, they left the glade, the forest parting gently before them. Elion walked with no destination in mind, only a purpose. To begin again, not as a prince, but as a man who had been humbled and reborn. Months passed, then years. Tales began to spread of a wandering healer, a man who carried no wealth but left villages better than he found them. He offered no grand proclamations, no promises of miracles, only quiet acts of kindness, an ear to listen, a hand to help, a word to guide. In time, the name of Prince Elion faded from memory, replaced by a figure who belonged not to palaces, but to the people. Yet, the echoes of the 12 bells of eternity lingered. In quiet moments, when the wind brushed through the trees, or a distant chime carried on the breeze, The bell's song could be heard, a melody of redemption woven into the world. And somewhere, in a quiet forest, where the Tower of Eternity once stood, the earth hummed with life, bearing silent witness to the man who had learned that true power lay not in ruling others, but in the courage to face oneself.